Of all games, gambling is the one that should be approached with the greatest caution. One can lose their head, risk everything, and lose. This often leads to a bad outcome. David was indeed addicted to gambling, but was this the real reason behind the tragedy that unfolded? David Nixon was a good-natured, ambitious, and positive person. He lived in the small town of Grapevine, Texas, USA. The man was in the business world and could sell anything to anyone. His first wife, Donna Lella, spoke only positively about him. They married in 1990, and a year later, the couple had a son. David began dealing in real estate, and it turned out to be a very promising profession for someone of his intellect. Gradually, he became the leading broker in town, closing deals worth millions of dollars. He enjoyed working with luxury estates in the wealthy suburbs north of Dallas the most. Their marriage broke down in 1995 after David had an affair with flight attendant Lisa Hill. However, he maintained a good relationship with his first wife, mainly because of their shared son, Nicholas. David married a new woman, but they divorced 2 years later. The man didn't stay single for long. Even before his divorce from Lisa was finalized, he met another woman, an attractive 27-year-old named Tracy Frame, who worked as an accountant. Tracy described David as charming and a very nice person to get along with. He met her at a time when Tracy had little interest in dating and relationships. The young woman ignored her admirer's advances for a long time, but he was very persistent, so she agreed to a date with him. After that, they began to build a romantic relationship. Soon, the couple moved into David's house to live together. Thus, David's probable third wife moved to Grapevine. Those close to him described the man as a great lover of exquisite and beautiful things, which he possessed in abundance. The desire for luxury goods, which sometimes didn't match his income, became a characteristic trait of David. Tracy didn't really care about his problems either, as the realtor always managed to get out of any unpleasant situation and continue living a social life. At the time of the events described, David's son was 11 years old. He simply idolized his father. According to the boy, David was reliable and never refused to help those close to him. The man communicated regularly with his son, took him out on weekends and during holidays, which helped them develop a strong bond. David was in the prime of his life when he suddenly became the victim of a tragic murder. But could his extravagant lifestyle, his risk-taking nature, and his financial troubles have been the reason for the incident? On April 18, 2002, a passerby noticed a fire late in the evening and called the fire department. When the firefighters managed to extinguish the blaze, they made a suspicious discovery, presumably a human body wrapped in something. The firefighters then alerted the police. In the middle of the night, an investigator from the local police department was called to the scene. It was David Nixon's new house in Grand Prairie, Texas, where the man had recently moved before the tragic event. The officer later recalled that he smelled the foul odor of burnt and charred flesh as he stepped out of his car in the driveway in front of the house. He discovered the body wrapped in multiple layers of fabric that were not completely burned. It was later found to be an electric blanket, a sturdy camping tarp, and a rope that held everything together. The investigator examined the body, which was in a terrible condition. He couldn't even definitively tell whether it was a man or a woman. However, based on the preserved facial features, the officer determined that the deceased was a fair-skinned man. The police officer called for backup, as handling the charred corpse delicately was impossible to do alone. It took several hours before the body could be carefully removed from the scene. During the on-site investigation, tire tracks and some fibrous materials were found that might have been used to start the fire. These were later identified as electric blankets. However, no other usable evidence was found to identify the suspect. The coroner conducted an analysis and determined that the deceased was a man in his early 40s who was killed by a single shot to the heart area. He was already dead before the fire started, making it a case of homicide. There were no signs of a struggle, so the experts assumed that the immediate death by a bullet surprised the victim, possibly while he was sleeping. During the first autopsy, the victim could not be identified, although investigators were confident that the deceased was the homeowner. Dental records were needed to identify the person. Based on these records, it was confirmed that the murdered man was indeed the 40-year-old realtor and gambling addict David Nixon. This event was a severe blow to the family of the deceased, especially to his son Nicholas. That day, the boy was supposed to call his father, but he got no answer. The teenager felt that something terrible might have happened, but he didn't know that his father was already dead at that time. From the beginning, police officers suspected that the victim's roommate might be the murderer. The couple's acquaintances said that they generally got along well, but there were occasional serious arguments about David's finances and gambling debts. In such moments, the situation would escalate, and everyone nearby would try to get away. The longer this tumultuous relationship lasted, the more Tracy accused her boyfriend of spending exorbitant amounts on gambling. He argued that it was none of her business. Their differences became more apparent in the spring of 2002, and after almost 4 years of being together, the couple decided to separate. However, this threatened to lead to a serious legal dispute due to tax issues, and out of fear of losing the house, David transferred it to Tracy to protect his property. When the issue of separation came up, Tracy wanted to keep the rights to David's fancy house with its covered terrace and heated pool. The man tried to resolve the matter with her and reclaim his property, but she refused to agree. On April 10th, the situation almost got out of control when David called the police to report that Tracy had changed the locks on his house without his knowledge. She had taken advantage of his absence when the realtor went on a business trip to a neighboring town. The police were able to mediate the dispute that same evening. After that, the two sat down, according to their statements, to negotiate a solution that would be favorable to both. Tracy claimed she had invested her own money in the renovation of the house, which is why she insisted she had the right to keep it. However, she couldn't prove the investment, and it was impossible to come to an agreement with her ex. Almost 2 weeks later, David was found murdered. All of this naturally appeared suspicious, since the man had no other conflicts with anyone else. It seemed quite likely that Tracy was involved in getting rid of her partner to keep the house. Moreover, it is usually the people closest to the victim who are involved in the murder. Tracy cooperated with the investigators. She wondered who could have killed David, but the victim's first wife had no doubts. On the very night she learned about her ex-husband's death, Donna went to the police station. She said that her ex-husband had recently feared for his life because of Tracy's inappropriate behavior. She handed over to the police his last will, as he had asked her to give them the name of his murderer should something happen to him. It was Tracy Frame. The man himself had never contacted the police when he faced domestic violence and downplayed the problems. But Donna knew everything and realized that David was in a dangerous situation when it came to the division of property. He had always tried to find an amicable solution to the dispute, but it seemed that his partner was provoking more conflicts. Donna called the police to her ex-husband's house when she learned that their son could not reach his father. Previously, she had called Tracy and tried to find out what might have happened, but Tracy brushed it off and said that she hadn't been keeping an eye on her ex-boyfriend, from whom she had already separated. In her opinion, he could be anywhere, perhaps drinking or gambling. She said that David had been hanging out with a group of friends during these days and was moving to a new house, which is why he had to stay in a hotel. According to her, he always traveled to Las Vegas over the weekends. This city became another possible destination for the search. Tracy assured Donna that he usually gambled and partied with call girls during this time. Despite the split, the couple, according to Tracy, still lived together for a while in the contested house in Grapevine. However, they had agreed that the man would soon move out. Just a few days before David was found dead, he was supposed to pack his things and move into a new house in Grand Prairie. According to Tracy's statement, the former lovers had discussed the moving plans. David had asked her to rent a moving truck to transport his belongings. She didn't let him down and called Penske to rent a special truck and a dolly to help load the items onto the truck. In the afternoon, David packed up his things and drove to his new address. Then, he intended to return to pick up the rest, but David never came back. Naturally, Tracy became a key witness for the investigators. Moreover, the resulting disagreement provided a strong motive for the crime. From the beginning, the investigators paid close attention to her, as it seemed that the young woman was the perfect candidate for the role of a suspect. During the first interrogation, when Tracy learned that David had been murdered, the investigators expected to see a grieving woman who needed comfort after the loss of a loved one, as is usually the case. However, her reaction was completely different from what the police had anticipated. She immediately asked how the body had been identified. The officers were troubled by this strange question. Later, however, Tracy emphasized that she had never asked such a question. The first meeting with the victim's girlfriend only heightened their suspicion of her. From that moment on, the investigators began to verify their assumptions. According to Tracy, they had a serious disagreement a few months before the man's death. With tears in her eyes, she said that she had lost a child the night before all of these events occurred, which only made the situation worse. It turned out that Tracy found out she was pregnant last fall. David was the father. This coincided with the moment when the couple's relationship began to fall apart. Additionally, her health problems were becoming apparent. For these reasons, the woman began to experience emotional difficulties. She realized it was not the right time to have a child and decided to terminate the pregnancy. Despite her own decision, she blamed David for the loss of the child, which presented a new motive. The woman expected a different reaction from her lover, support, but it turned out that he was indifferent to the situation. She claimed that instead of sympathy and support, she only received sarcastic comments. After hearing this, Tracy finally realized that she didn't want to be with such an insensitive and cruel man. It is noteworthy that the investigators couldn't find any evidence of Tracy's pregnancy, let alone any evidence of David's reaction. Everything was recorded solely based on her statements. The investigators closely observed the primary suspect during the initial interrogation. Afterward, every officer was unanimously convinced that Tracy was lying. According to the police officers, she gave evasive answers, was confused in her statements, and sometimes her body language clearly indicated deceit. Despite this, the woman continued to insist that she was not involved in the incident and had no idea about the circumstances of the murder. Since Tracy refused to confess, the investigators had no way to charge her. They had no evidence, so Tracy was simply released from the station. The crime scene was thoroughly examined, as was the storm drain, but a fire crew had already washed away most of the traces when extinguishing the fire. The only valuable clue was the tire tracks, which the police officers believed were identical to the treads of a Penske van that Tracy had rented for her ex. During the inspection of the storm drain, small footprints and fabric fibers similar to the materials David's body had been wrapped in were found. It appeared as if the murderer had tried to stuff the body into the drain but failed. Most witnesses described Tracy as a quarrelsome and aggressive woman. The reports about her were overwhelmingly negative, but that obviously wasn't enough to arrest and charge her. The police began checking video recordings from around the victim's residence. On the same day, a young woman who looked very similar to Tracy was filmed in front of a store near the house. Although the footage was blurry, the the investigators were able to reconstruct the sequence of events using the video material. After reviewing dozens of hours of footage, the investigators found the same distinctive yellow Penske van that looked like a rental vehicle, which had also stopped near the victim's house. The van was later traced back to the driveway of the house. The next footage showed that 3 days after David's murder, someone parked a white Lexus, which resembled Tracy's car, in the parking lot. The footage again showed a woman walking along the front of the store, buying something, and then leaving. The employees of the Tom Thumb store revealed that she had bought cleaning supplies in large quantities, which looked very suspicious. The investigators recognized Tracy as the woman in the video and began communicating more persistently with her. Nevertheless, she continued to claim that she had nothing to do with the murder, and that all the documents found by the police were forged to frame her and close the case quickly. As an alibi, Tracy claimed that she was with her parents in Arlington during that time. However, it was impossible to find witnesses to confirm her presence in another city since her family had been out of town. The police officers needed more information to file charges. It was decided to obtain a search warrant for the primary suspect's home. According to the investigators, Tracy killed David in his sleep with a shot to the heart, which took place in the victim's home. The medical examiners believed that David didn't even have time to feel anything while he slept. It turned out that Tracy purchased a new mattress immediately after David's death, which confirmed the investigators' suspicions. It also seemed suspicious that the house was full of cleaning products, similar to those on the shopping list from the hardware store where Tracy had allegedly bought them. In the event of the man's death, Tracy stood to gain a tangible financial benefit in the form of the house. According to Donna, the house was the only reason for the murder. Tracy insisted that David's death would not bring her any income. She argued that she deserved David's house to be transferred to her. She claimed that there were no insurance policies on David in which she could have been a beneficiary, and since she was not formally married to the man, she could not make any other claims. It was suspected that the motive might not only be a financial issue, but also revenge for a broken relationship. Investigators believed that after the murder, Tracy used the yellow Penske van that she had allegedly rented to help David move. It was likely that this had been planned from the beginning to mislead the investigation. The detectives thought that the murderer used the van to transport the body, strapping the deceased to a dolly with belts, then drove to the location of the new house David wanted to move into. Here, fibers were found that suggested Tracy tried to dispose of David by dumping the body in a storm drain, but she obviously failed. She likely left him on the property and returned 2 days later to finish what she had started. During this time, she was recorded several times on surveillance cameras. She apparently decided to destroy the evidence by burning the body in a fire. Tracy likely wanted to ensure that David's remains would burn to ashes, wrapping the body in multiple layers of tarps and electric blankets. Unfortunately for the killer, a passing driver noticed the fire and called the fire department. If Tracy's plan had succeeded and no one had noticed the fire, she could have disposed of the charred remains in a sewer. Due to a mishap, this was not possible. The day after a second visit to the police station, the woman was arrested and charged with the murder of David Nixon. During an initial hearing, the judge released the accused on bail. She was equipped with an electronic tracking device that allowed her to move around freely until the hearing on the murder charges. Although all of David's friends and acquaintances were convinced of his ex-girlfriend's guilt, she had many defenders. The most committed of them was Roland Taylor. The man was a local dentist and a neighbor of the couple. He was born in the United Kingdom, but later moved to Texas and settled there. Roland and Tracy had been friends for a long time. He had already heard some accusations against the woman, but was sure that Tracy was the exact opposite of what the critics described. The man remained convinced that David had many enemies due to his gambling debts who might have wanted to kill him. David not only owed money to many people, but it seemed that he had no intention of stopping. The deceased spent enormous sums in casinos and on escorts. Against this background, it was, of course, worthwhile to look for other potential suspects who had a motive. Upon investigation, however, it was found that the deceased had no debts. Sometimes he borrowed sums, lost them in the casino, and then paid off his creditors promptly. Therefore, this version proved to be unsustainable. The active stance of the defense led to speculation that the pair had an affair after Tracy was released on bail. Later, Roland and Tracy got engaged. The man was ready to do anything to defend the justice and freedom of the woman he loved. He helped her find a decent lawyer, and with his help, Tracy hired an attorney in 2005. He turned out to be an experienced criminal defense attorney, although he had only handled 3 murder cases. Nonetheless, he was confident that the prosecutors only had circumstantial evidence and that it would be easy for him to secure an acquittal for his client. In the attorney's opinion, she was arrested within the first 36 hours of the investigation, which was too short a time to thoroughly examine all potential suspects in the case and adequately assess their likely involvement. Only a criminal caught red-handed at the crime scene, for instance, with a weapon in hand, could be arrested so quickly. That was not the case here. Normally, investigators need more time to check and narrow down possible suspects. The defense attorney saw this as a clear attempt to close the case as quickly as possible and place the responsibility for the crime on the first suspect they could find. Moreover, according to him, the prosecution had no direct evidence of her involvement in the murder. No traces of Tracy's DNA or fingerprints were found either in the house or in the van. No murder weapon, presumably a pistol, was found either. The prosecution relied on the statements of some of the people questioned who were convinced of Tracy's guilt from the outset due to their conflicts with the deceased. Their relationship had been so turbulent that David had obtained a restraining order against his ex shortly before his death, and they had no contact with each other, even though they lived in the same house. Against this background, her story about David asking her for help with the move sounded strange. People close to him said that the man tried to avoid his ex more. The lawyer knew that the police had a video of his client's interrogation and requested a copy. After reviewing the material, the defense attorney was convinced that the police had used one of their interrogation techniques to put pressure on the suspect and get the answers they wanted. The defense insisted that everything had been planned from the start to make Tracy look bad. One of the prosecutor's strongest pieces of evidence was the surveillance footage showing Tracy leaving her white Lexus, getting into a rented van, and then shopping for cleaning supplies at a store near the crime scene. After speaking with the store's employees, it was possible to obtain the receipts for the purchases made by the woman captured on the footage. The shopper used a loyalty card to get a discount, and the card was registered in the suspect's name, saving her 19 cents. Tracy claimed that she couldn't remember the existence of such a card and emphasized that under no circumstances would she leave such a trail if she intended to move unnoticed through the city. The woman was convinced that she was being framed. The investigators matched the cleaning supplies found during the house search and were confident that these items were the same ones purchased at the hardware store. The defense lawyer presented several theories that could explain David's death. It was speculated that he might have been the victim of a robbery, or that the attack could have been a carefully planned act of revenge, targeting the gambling-addicted realtor because of his debts. In the lawyer's opinion, other potential killers were more suitable suspects than Tracy. The defense believed that Jerry Vauville, a longtime friend of David's, could be involved in the case. They had vacationed together at the lake house, and he was a frequent visitor to their home and knew Tracy well. According to the woman, Jerry had borrowed money from David and didn't want to pay it back, which could be a motive for murder. The police decided to investigate the man. Jerry immediately understood Tracy's attempt to shift the blame onto him since he was an easy target due to his close relationship with the victim. He admitted that he had occasionally borrowed money from David, but he refused to admit any involvement in the case. According to the man, Jerry was in the business of selling used cars. 2 months before the tragedy, he needed money and asked his friend David for a large sum, which David didn't refuse. After Christmas, however, Jerry repaid the entire amount. Jerry and David had planned to meet on the night of his disappearance. According to Jerry, David wanted to buy a new boat. Jerry confessed that they were supposed to go out for a drink that day to celebrate the long-awaited purchase. The last time he heard David's voice was on the morning of the day he disappeared, when the friends spoke on the phone and set a time to meet. Unfortunately, David never showed up and didn't answer his phone again. It wasn't until later that his friend realized what had really happened. The lawyer knew from Tracy that David had planned to bring $25,000 in cash that day to meet his friend because he was ready to buy the boat on the spot. Jerry insisted that he hadn't seen David that day and that there were no further debts between them, so he had no motive to commit the crime. After this lid didn't pan out, Tracy pointed to another possible killer, who turned out to be the victim's first wife, Donna. Just 2 months before his death, David took out an insurance policy worth $500,000 and named his son as the primary beneficiary, with Donna as the secondary beneficiary, since the boy was still too young at that time. The deceased's ex-wife received the payout for his death. Tracy herself was not mentioned in any of these policies, which suggested that Donna benefited from her ex-husband's death. Nonetheless, Donna received a very modest sum after his death, about $50,000, to take care of their son. She considered it absurd to call this a motive for such a brutal crime, since David would have paid her more in child support every month while he was alive. The deceased's son, Nicholas, also insisted from the beginning that only Tracy could have killed his father. He had repeatedly witnessed their rather violent arguments and was certain that it was always Tracy who provoked them. The defense attorney continued to argue that the prosecution had no real evidence against Tracy and that the police hadn't seriously investigated the possible involvement of other people. More than 3 years had passed since David's murder, and now Tracy was finally going to stand trial. Along with her lawyer, she was confident, as they didn't take the prosecution's arguments seriously. The prosecution, on the other hand, believed there could be no doubt about Tracy's involvement. She was an unstable and aggressive woman who didn't even need a motive to kill someone. However, a motive in the form of a house was a compelling argument, as the man could challenge the reinstatement of the house in Tracy's name and reclaim the property. Dentist Roland Taylor, the accused's fiancé, continued to insist that the court was wrong and was about to prosecute the wrong person. He was convinced of her innocence and believed that the loyalty card with Tracy's name had been deliberately stolen to incriminate her. The defense attorney continued to argue that the prosecution had no forensic evidence. There were no witnesses, and the murder weapon had not yet been found. The defense lawyer was confident that the case file would not even be sufficient to substantiate the charges. Tracy believed that the incident was a calculated revenge scheme and insisted that she was being wrongfully accused and that the real culprit would never be found. In her opinion, the investigators simply did not dig deep enough into the case. But the prosecutor also had valuable information. According to the deceased's son, Nicholas, his father kept a gun in a safe in the bedroom of the house where the man lived with Tracy. The investigators were never able to locate the weapon to conduct a ballistic test. The son believed that the suspect had access to the safe used the gun, and then disposed of it. Tracy, however, maintained that David never kept a weapon on the premises, at least none that she had seen. At the same time, she could not explain why she had bought a new mattress right after her ex's death. The reason seemed quite obvious. The old mattress had become a crime scene that couldn't be cleaned of blood anymore. The prosecution's arguments were supported by witnesses, particularly the store employees, who identified Tracy as the woman who had visited the store that day and purchased a large quantity of cleaning supplies, which could have been used to clean up blood. She even asked the staff in the household chemicals department what would effectively remove bloodstains from a carpet. They recommended hydrochloric acid, which was unavailable, so they suggested ordering the product online. She bought other items as well. During a subsequent search, all the purchased items were found in the house where Tracy lived. The prosecution argued that this allowed the pieces of the puzzle to come together into a coherent whole. The defense made another attempt to portray Donna as the likely murderer, arguing that she had a strong motive. However, Nicholas's mother received too little, only $50,000, to seriously consider committing such a crime. They also tried to pin the blame on David's second wife, Lisa, as a possible suspect. A thorough investigation was conducted to see if Donna and Lisa were involved in the murder. Phone data and geographic movements were analyzed. Ultimately, they could not be connected to the crime in any way. Additionally, Donna and Lisa had good relationships with their ex-husband, which was confirmed by many people, and they both had solid alibis. Lisa seemed to have no motive for the murder whatsoever. At the end of the hearing, Tracy felt less confident. She stated, "I don't believe in justice anymore. I don't know how I will feel afterward." The trial lasted 2 weeks, and the jury found the ex-wife of the deceased guilty. The decision was reached in less than 4 hours, and the woman was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The outcome completely satisfied the victim's family, and most breathed a sigh of relief, except for Roland Taylor. He remained loyal to his fiancée, continued to insist on her innocence, and visited her in prison. Tracy, with his help, filed an appeal, which was ultimately rejected. She will be eligible for parole in 2024, at which point she will be 55 years old. Roland still visits Tracy every weekend in prison. Thank you for watching, and take care. Not everyone is destined to become rich and famous, even if these criteria are considered the main measures of success in many communities. Some people want to be liked at any cost. In the Criminal Chronicles of the United States of America, there is a cruel, enlightening story that shows how far delusion and the desire to fit into a privileged society can go. Kirsten Costas was born on June 23, 1968. Her family, consisting of her mother Bernadette and her father Arthur, moved to the small town of Orinda, California, even before the children were born. With fewer than 20,000 inhabitants, it was quiet, cozy, and safe, simply the perfect place to raise children. Bernadette had given birth to 2 children, daughter Kirsten and son Peter. In this town, the family was quite well known. Everyone considered them decent and hardworking people. The Costas were quite wealthy, even by the standards of the local community, which was dominated by high-income individuals. The town was predominantly populated by successful and affluent people. In this community, the girls' parents earned great respect. Everything they owned, they had built with their own work. Arthur worked for a large American company called 3M. He was among the local executives. His wife worked in a community center and also reached a fairly high position. Together, the couple earned a good income and had no trouble supporting a family with 2 children who never lacked anything. The family was an active member of the tennis club and frequently visited the swimming pool. It is evident that Kirsten and her brother Peter had a carefree childhood. They grew up in a friendly, loving family and remained closely bonded siblings from a young age. At the age of 15, Kirsten was a teenager with typical problems. During this time, she attended high school. The girl was sociable, confident, friendly, and athletic. Kirsten trained constantly, was sporty, looked good, and had excellent grades. She had the respect of her teachers and classmates. In fact, Kirsten participated in almost all school sports, from swimming to dancing. She regularly took part and showed great talent. She proved to be incredibly energetic and sociable in life, allowing her to gather a large number of friends around her. She dressed colorfully and unusually, combining different styles, and many tried to imitate her. In the summer of 1984, Kirsten had just finished her second year at high school. During the summer holidays, she found out that there was a cheerleading squad. The girl was smart, charismatic, and athletically successful, the perfect cheerleader. Kirsten was very popular at school, and she really liked this additional opportunity to prove herself. Together with a friend, she applied to become a member of the cheerleading group, but the 20-member committee chose Kirsten. The selection process was very serious, and it was not easy for her to win. This was because the girl also trained a lot at home and did everything she could to secure a place on the team. The family supported Kirsten. Her parents paid additional contributions to the cheerleading team's fund, bought uniforms, and helped her in every possible way. However, this new team was not as welcoming as it first seemed. All the girls in the cheerleading group came from wealthy families, and during this time, there was a kind of competition among the participants. The richer you were, the better. Thanks to her parents' wealth, Kirsten had no problem with this issue. She seemed to fit in effortlessly. But there were still some tensions among the girls. Kirsten was not only accepted into the cheerleading group, but also into the school's sorority, a privileged club for the most popular, beautiful, and wealthy girls. Amid all these positive changes that Kirsten perceived as positive, she expected her last year in high school to be as fulfilling and interesting as possible, and she assumed these would be the best years of her life. Kirsten was a 15-year-old teenager who had everything young people at this age dream of. She had a striking appearance, glamour, status, her parents' wealth, popularity, and prospects in all directions. Kirsten had no idea how high the price for all this would be. On the evening of June 23, 1984, a man named Arthur Hillman heard cries for help on the street. At that moment, he was in his house, which was located near the Costas family. When he looked out the window, he saw a girl who was covered with dark spots, stumbling and staggering toward him. She asked for help and was blood-stained. Arthur immediately recognized his neighbor, the 15-year-old Kirsten, and ran to the door. The girl was alive but severely injured. With her last strength, she managed to say that she had been attacked and stabbed multiple times not far from the front door. The attacker had then simply fled. Kirsten did not name the assailant. The girl was bleeding heavily and lost so much blood within minutes that she could practically no longer stand. Arthur ran outside to help, and Kirsten collapsed powerlessly into his arms. The student had lost too much blood from her wounds and could no longer stand. The neighbor, who had known her since childhood, tried to stop the bleeding and called out to his wife to call emergency services. While the wife made the emergency call, Arthur held the dying girl in his arms and provided emergency care. He tried to find out what had happened to his neighbor and who had attacked her, but Kirsten seemed no longer aware of what was happening. She spoke incoherently, repeatedly saying that she couldn't breathe, and then lost consciousness. As it turned out, the girl's parents were not at home at the time of the attack. They were at a baseball game of their son Peter, and later had dinner with his baseball team at a restaurant. The couple and their son returned home only 5 minutes after the attack on Kirsten, and the news came as a surprise to them. By that time, she had already been transported by paramedics in an ambulance. The parents rushed after the vehicle and arrived at the hospital a few minutes later. On the way there, the paramedics provided assistance to the girl. The doctors at the hospital also fought for her life, but it was of no use, and she was declared dead about an hour later. The cause of death was blood loss due to stab wounds. During the autopsy, the coroner found 5 stab wounds on Kirsten's body, 1 in the back and the other stab wounds in the abdomen. The police first decided to talk to the neighbor of the victim, who turned out to be the last person to see the victim alive and had tried to help her. For him and everyone else in his environment, what had happened was a real shock. No one had expected a defenseless girl to be attacked near her home. Their neighborhood had always been quiet and safe. Everyone lived here. Many people didn't even lock their doors. No one would have expected such an attack in their town. They thought it was a satanic act and that the murderer came from outside the town. No one wanted to believe that the attacker came from the area, as that could mean that now all people were in danger. Parents kept their children away from outings and parties, and police officers patrolled the town to reassure the residents. Unfortunately, Arthur did not see the attacker, but as he held the dying Kirsten in his arms, he noticed a white Volvo driving down the street. A few seconds earlier, it had been parked on the curb not far from the victim's house, and that seemed strange to him. The man knew the cars of all the residents in the neighborhood, but this car seemed unfamiliar to him. The police officers suspected that the driver of this car was the murderer. Unfortunately, Arthur could not remember the license plate, but he tried to describe the appearance of the Volvo to the police as accurately as possible. Amazingly, while the officers were questioning the victim's neighbor at the crime scene, a white Volvo stopped at the same spot on the roadside. Arthur recognized it immediately. The driver got out of the car and introduced himself as Alex Arnold. Based on the witness's statement, the police assumed he was the main suspect in the crime. The fact that he appeared again at the crime scene during the investigation seemed strange, and as we know, murderers often return to the crime scene. However, in response to the investigators' questions, the man told an incredible story. According to Alex, that evening, a girl he knew knocked on his house, which was in a neighboring town, and asked to make a phone call. It was Kirsten. They were friends with her parents. Kirsten came to his house and told him that she was walking with a girl she knew, but they had argued, so she decided to go home. The student asked to call her parents. Alex let her into the house, but the girl couldn't reach them because the couple was at a game at that time, and there were no cell phones back then. Seeing Kirsten's predicament, Alex couldn't leave her alone and offered to drive her home in his car so she wouldn't have to walk alone late in the evening. She agreed. According to the man, as soon as they left his house, a car began to follow them. It was a yellow Ford Pinto that relentlessly followed them the whole way. Alex asked the girl if she knew the owner of the yellow car that was following them. Kirsten replied that she knew him, but that it wasn't worth worrying about, and she didn't go into details. The man didn't insist. When they arrived at her house, the girl said goodbye to Alex and got out. At that moment, the driver noticed that a yellow Ford Pinto had stopped right behind him. As soon as Kirsten reached the house, a person got out of the yellow car. Alex observed the scene. He couldn't see the face exactly, but he could tell that it was a girl in a yellow shirt and red pants. Kirsten saw her approaching and screamed that she should be left alone. Her attacker, however, had no intention of retreating. She pulled out a large knife and stabbed Kirsten several times in the abdomen. When the victim fell to the ground, the attacker stabbed her again in the back. She then jumped into the yellow car and drove away. According to Arnold, he set off to try to catch up with the car carrying the perpetrator. Alex saw that a neighbor had gone out to help the injured girl and decided that it was more important to catch the murderer. However, since he soon lost sight of her, he decided to return to Kirsten's house to make sure she was okay. By this time, she had already been taken to the hospital, and the police were talking to the victim's neighbor. He decided to make a statement to assist the investigators. After hearing the story, the police initially thought that the man might have invented the story to deflect suspicion from himself. However, his behavior and words seemed convincing enough. He successfully passed a lie detector test and showed no traces of blood. He was eventually removed from the list of suspects. This also happened after checking his phone. Calls had been made from Alex's private number to the Costas' house. There were several witnesses who confirmed that Kirsten had asked him for help. Alex's wife, who was also in the house, confirmed her husband's story. After the failed call, the man drove Kirsten home. It would have been illogical for him to kill her in front of the girl's house and risk being caught by neighbors or possibly the parents when he could have done it safely in his own home. Alex was questioned extensively and was able to describe the attacker as a young girl with blonde hair. He could describe quite in detail what he had seen, giving the police officers guidance to find the perpetrator. Initially, it was decided to check Kirsten's immediate surroundings to find a girl matching her description. Possibly, it was the same acquaintance with whom the victim had argued that evening. The investigators later spoke to the victim's parents and obtained useful information. According to the mother, a week before the attack, while her daughter was attending a cheerleader camp, she received a strange call. A girl called the house and identified herself as Kim. She said she was a leader of the school's cheerleading squad and invited Kirsten to a private sorority party. This party was to take place on June 23rd, and all members of the sorority were to attend. Kirsten was, of course, invited to this event for the most popular teenagers. A car was supposed to pick Kirsten up that evening, and she was not to tell anyone about it. This coincidence seemed strange to the investigators because the murder happened right after the sorority party. The police found out that this invitation was actually a deception. They managed to call most of the cheerleaders, and it turned out that none of them had been invited to the party or had attended it. Moreover, the cheerleader Kim was on vacation in Hawaii at that time, and without her, the party couldn't have taken place. Obviously, she couldn't have called and arranged meetings, so it wasn't Kim who called. Apparently, the invitation was directed only at Kirsten to lure her out and reprimand her. Unfortunately, there was no way to trace the call. The data had already been deleted, which significantly slowed down the investigation. The investigators knew that the call had been made a week before the murder, which meant it was a deliberate, carefully planned attack. The investigators realized that the so-called leader of the sorority, who called the Costas, must have known her victim well and had a motive. Most likely, they went to school together, or the girl also belonged to the cheerleaders and possibly harbored a grudge against the victim. The investigators then began to closely examine Kirsten's immediate surroundings. They questioned dozens of girls and even had several of them take a lie detector test. In conversations with other students, the investigators found that Kirsten was one of the most popular girls at school. They speculated that the murderer might have been an outsider who often harbored hatred towards people like Kirsten and wanted to exact revenge. It was assumed that it was a lonely, rebellious girl who found it difficult to fit into society and was not socialized. Nancy Kane fit this description perfectly. She also went to school with Kirsten and had an unusual sense of style. She dressed in dark colors, dyed her hair, and used aggressive makeup. Other students reported that she often drank and liked to smoke illegal substances. Nancy was an outsider in the class and was often criticized by other students, including Kirsten. Nancy had once been a popular teenager herself, but later admitted that she was bored with the monotonous friends and didn't like the life concepts of these rich girls. Their paths diverged, and others began to avoid her, so she became a loner. The investigators suggested Nancy come in for an interview to ask her some questions, and she appeared at the station. According to Nancy, she had an alibi. She was at the cinema on the evening of the massacre. The girl, however, refused to undergo a lie detector test, and her relatives also strongly opposed this test to avoid traumatizing their daughter's still undeveloped psyche. Father and mother feared that the test could yield a false result due to Nancy's excitement. Despite the validity of these opinions, the investigators became very suspicious of Nancy, who qualified as a suspect. Of course, the investigators believed that the real reason for her refusal to undergo the lie detector test was that Nancy was involved in the attack and was afraid of being exposed. However, there was no solid evidence against her that would have allowed charges to be brought against the main suspect. The investigators decided to release the girl, but did not exclude her as a suspect and began to closely monitor her. In the community, rumors spread that Nancy had threatened Kirsten in class the day before her death, and that they had had an argument. The suspect, however, denied this information. Calls from residents threatening her with death came to Nancy's house every evening. Most people believed that Nancy was behind the crime. The suspect became a real outcast, was bullied at school, and her parents were forced to transfer her to another school. Nancy and her parents were having a difficult time at this point. Later, Nancy herself returned to the station and revealed that she had lied to the police officers. According to the student, she was not at the cinema at the time of the attack, but was out with her boyfriend. The girl stated that she was afraid her parents might find out where she really was and ruin her relationship, which is why she didn't tell the truth about her whereabouts in front of her parents. Nancy's boyfriend confirmed her alibi. The young man admitted to the investigators that he met with Nancy in the evening and that they were together until late at night. The investigators were therefore forced to exclude her as a possible perpetrator. The investigation continued, but there were no visible progress. The police questioned dozens of teenagers and even offered a reward for information leading to the capture and punishment of the murderer, but all this had no effect. Months passed without results. Therefore, the district police decided to turn to the FBI. The agents participated in the investigation into Kirsten's murder. Their task was to create a psychological profile of the murderer that the police officers could compare with the girls from the deceased's close circle. The FBI assumed that the murderer was about the same age as the victim. They assumed that she lived near Kirsten and was familiar with the area, allowing her to evade pursuit. The girl must have harbored a strong grudge against the victim, which was the reason for the attack. The agent was sure that the perpetrator felt no remorse for what had happened and believed that Kirsten deserved such punishment. After the police had checked all the girls from the victim's environment, suspicion fell on Bernadette, a student from the same class as the victim. She was 16 years old at the time of the crime. Both girls were part of an active community, but Kirsten was considered the most popular at school, while Bernadette only aspired to belong to the privileged youths and was very jealous of the deceased. Several months had passed since the investigation began when the victim's parents hired a private detective. The mother and father were eager to find out what had happened to their daughter and were dissatisfied with the slow progress of the investigation. This initiative quickly bore fruit. The hired detective analyzed all the data the police had collected and found the girl who most closely matched the police's description and the witness Alex. It was the private detective who first suspected Bernadette of being involved in the massacre. As it turned out, Bernadette was one of the first to be contacted by the police at the beginning of the investigation. She actively participated in the investigation and even passed a lie detector test. The police believed that Bernadette had passed the test, but the private detective found the results inconclusive. Bernadette stated that on the day of the murder, she was working as a babysitter on the side and was watching the children of a family she knew. She occasionally worked as a babysitter and was asked to watch the children that evening and even stay the whole night. As it turned out, the police had never verified Bernadette's alibi, and simply let her go home. When the private detective decided to check this information with the girl's parents, he found out that she had lied. Bernadette had referred to a family with children she hadn't worked with for over a year, and they themselves denied the student's statement. Of course, this lie became a reason for new suspicions. She had something to hide. The girl automatically became the main suspect. In December 1984, Bernadette was questioned again at the police station based on a tip from the private detective. 6 months had passed since the investigation began. The high school student perfectly matched the murderer's profile. The girl did not deny that she really knew the victim and had even met with her the night before the attack, but did not confirm the investigator's suspicion that she had attacked the victim. It is known that Bernadette, along with other classmates, even attended Kirsten's funeral. Witnesses reported that the girl cried there, but in reality, it was all just an act necessary to deflect any suspicion from the police. The investigators needed solid evidence to charge the suspect. Forensic examinations were far from modern capabilities at that time. There were no DNA tests. Bernadette was interrogated repeatedly in the hope that the murderer would confess, but the teenager could never be broken, so the police were forced to let her go and once again stood empty-handed. The investigation seemed to have reached a dead end. No physical evidence could be found linking the student to the attack. The sheriff's team checked thousands of leads, questioned 800 people, and examined 750 Ford Pinto cars. Fortunately, the interrogations were more effective than they seemed. In fact, Bernadette appeared very confused and frightened, which encouraged her to share her worries with someone. The girl struggled with this for a few days and then decided to confess to her devout parents. At first, she wanted to confess everything to her mother in a personal conversation, but she chose an unfortunate time. In the evening, her mother replied that she was tired and didn't want to listen to her daughter. So Bernadette decided to write a letter. The girl handed it to her parents in the morning and left the house with the note that it should be read half an hour later. The parents had no idea what was really going on, so they actually waited 30 minutes, assuming it was some kind of game. When Bernadette's mother opened the envelope, the letter contained a confession. "Mom and Dad, I did it," followed by a brief explanation of the act and an apology. The girl wrote that she hated herself and needed help. The parents were, of course, shocked. The mother and father then got into the car and were able to find their daughter when she was already halfway to school. The parents decided to do the right thing, put Bernadette in the car, and drove her to the nearest police station, where the student repeated her confession to the officers and admitted everything. The high school student confessed that she had organized and carried out the murder of her friend. Bernadette had faked a meeting to lure her into a trap. However, she admitted that she did not intend to kill her. Rather, the girl just wanted to talk to Kirsten and get closer to her. Bernadette dreamed of being just as popular and decided to befriend Kirsten. The girl didn't make it into the cheerleading squad, the sorority, or even into the school's schedule, so she was determined to change that. On the evening of June 23, 1984, she took her parents' yellow Ford and said she urgently needed to go to a friend's children. In this way, Bernadette tried to create an alibi to be away for the whole night. She then drove to Kirsten's house and picked her up in her car. The unsuspecting Kirsten got into the car. Bernadette deceived her supposed victim by telling her they were on their way because she had also been accepted into the popular cheerleading community and needed a ride. In reality, Bernadette drove to a neighboring town. The girl drove to a nearby parking lot near a church and stopped on the side so that her car was in the shade. A confused Kirsten tried to figure out what was going on and why they had driven in the other direction. Then, Bernadette confessed that there would be no party. She pulled out some illegal substances and offered to smoke them. Contrary to expectations, Kirsten refused. She didn't take substances and began to get angry. An argument broke out between the girls. According to Bernadette, her friend demanded that she be taken home. This whole ridiculous situation only made Kirsten angrier. She wasn't happy about it, and such an extravagant way of making friends through abduction seemed strange to her. Kirsten said so. The whole thing with the fake party appeared completely inappropriate and inexplicable to her, so she lost her temper and simply left. She wanted to get home alone. In this way, the victim reached Alex, who helped the student and took her in his car. All the while, they were followed by Bernadette, who, according to her, wanted to see how her classmate would get home. The murderer admitted that she had gone after Kirsten because she was afraid that her failed friend might tell the school about her unusual attempt at friendship. She would be seen as strange and ridiculed by everyone. That was a real catastrophe for the teenager. She desperately wanted to belong to the popular girls along with Kirsten and not become the object of ridicule. The girl was so frightened that she couldn't find a better way to solve this problem than to get rid of Kirsten. From the murderer's words, it emerged that she did her best to please Kirsten and gain her approval and support. She invented a fake party so they could spend time together and even brought illegal substances, which she thought would bring them together. In this way, according to Bernadette's plan, she would prove to Kirsten how well she could fit into their circle of friends. The student dreamed of climbing up the class hierarchy and becoming popular, so she made great efforts, but she obviously overdid it, and this absurd idea only worsened the situation. Bernadette had always envied Kirsten. No matter what she did, the student proved to be inferior to Kirsten. The envy and jealousy grew over the years and eventually culminated in a bloody tragedy. After the murder, Bernadette returned home, hid the knife in the garden, and went for a walk with her mother and dog. The next day, she washed the knife and returned it to the kitchen. Later, the girl threw her shirt and pants into a trash can near the school. There were numerous witnesses who confirmed the FBI agent's statements. Bernadette indeed harbored a strong grudge against her victim and had a motive. Many students at the school repeatedly observed how Kirsten admonished Bernadette and even occasionally mocked her. Both seemed to talk friendly with each other, but Kirsten occasionally called her a wannabe. All this offended the girl. Bernadette's family was much poorer than Kirsten's. The suspect's parents were already retired and couldn't afford many things. All this only made matters worse. The murderer claimed she had no evil intentions when she began preparing her plan. She just wanted to make contacts and befriend Kirsten. She had to lure the victim out of the house under some pretext. She just wanted to talk and build a friendship, and only when the situation got out of control did Bernadette panic and eventually stab her classmate. She emphasized that it was not a premeditated murder, but the result of an unfortunate chain of circumstances. However, this story had at least one inconsistency. How could Bernadette get her hands on a knife over 40 centimeters long? Such a weapon cannot accidentally end up in the girl's hands. This suggests that Bernadette may not have intended to kill Kirsten immediately, but had considered this possibility and prepared for a possible murder. The case was tried in court in March 1985. The prosecution disputed the murderer's statement and believed that the attack was carefully planned. All the lies about the invented party, the attempt to lure Kirsten out of the house, the large butcher knife that somehow accidentally ended up in the perpetrator's car, all these facts pointed to deliberate action. Bernadette had clearly planned the murder long in advance. The defendant's lawyer insisted on an unintentional act. The student countered the prosecutor by saying she used the knife to peel fruit in her car, which she loved and often bought. This argument, of course, seemed doubtful, as it's not very practical to use such a large knife, normally used for cutting meat, to peel fruit. Either way, the prosecution failed to convincingly prove the intent for murder. The jury decided that the student was guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Since the girl was still a minor at the time of the crime, she received only 9 years in a juvenile detention center. According to her lawyer, juveniles convicted of murder in California serve an average sentence of 4 to 6 years. Bernadette served 7 years of her stated sentence before being released on parole in 1992. By this time, she was 23 years old. Naturally, Kirsten's family was outraged by such a mild punishment for the brutal attack on their daughter. By this time, the murderer had already graduated from high school, passed her exams, and even received a diploma. She had a whole life ahead of her, which Kirsten was no longer granted. After her release, Bernadette changed her name and moved to another state, far away from malicious gossip. She married and had 2 children. Today, Bernadette is in her 50s and has lived the full life she had denied her classmate. The Costas family left Orinda and moved to Hawaii. They were never able to appeal the conviction and obtain a harsher sentence for the perpetrator. They still believe that the murderer of their daughter got off lightly. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.
Anna Kriegel was born on February 18, 2004, in the industrial city of Novokuznetsk in Siberia. She spent the first years of her life in an orphanage. On August 10, 2006, the girl was adopted by a foreign couple. Anna's adoptive parents were Geraldine Kriegel and her husband Patrick Kriegel, originally from France, but they had recently moved to Ireland. Anna's foster parents had a successful and stable life. Geraldine worked as a senior employee in the legal department of CAE, Ireland's largest public transport company, and Patrick was a French teacher at the Dublin Institute of Technology. At some point, Patrick withdrew from his usual activities and devoted most of his free time to raising his daughter. Although neither of Anna's parents had cultural ties to her homeland and birthplace, both tried to ensure that she did not lose contact with her roots. Perhaps that is why they did not change the girl's name. The love that Geraldine and Patrick felt for their daughter was all-encompassing and mutual. According to Geraldine, Anna came to their room every evening to say goodnight and tell them how much she loved them. Although the girl grew up in a good environment, she still had to deal with certain difficulties. The problems began at a young age. The side effects of various medical procedures that Anna had to undergo during her childhood later led to certain complications. The first bad news came when doctors discovered a tumor in the girl's right ear. Anna had to undergo a 5-hour operation. The tumor was eventually removed. The doctors thought everything had gone well, but it later turned out that the girl had partially lost her hearing due to the procedure. In addition, a clearly visible scar remained on the back of her head from the operation. This added to another injury that the girl had sustained some time ago when she tripped while jogging and hit her chin hard during the fall. According to Geraldine, Anna had always looked older than she was. She attributed this to her genetics. The woman was convinced that women in Siberia tend to grow faster. The girl was taller than the average height of her peers. In fact, Anna's growth process was so rapid that she experienced pain in her muscles and bones during puberty. This is not uncommon for many young people at the peak of their development. The pains are usually attributed to the fact that the muscles and bones of adolescents grow at different rates. Nevertheless, Anna's foster parents described her as a happy and cheerful girl. They repeatedly noted her beautiful, singing voice. The girl even wanted to learn to play the guitar. Her interest in music was clearly evident. When she went for walks, Anna always took her favorite blue headphones with her. But her greatest passion was still dancing. She could stay in her room for hours, listening to music and practicing various movements she had learned in the dance group. Furthermore, the girl was active on social networks. She often posted videos of herself dancing and singing. She had only about 100 followers, but she made great efforts to maintain her account. Unfortunately, she often received insulting comments on social media. Some users even advised her to harm herself. The girl's appearance was one of the main reasons for bullying by her classmates. Her statuesque height and her physique caused her more suffering than pride. thanks to her build and endurance. However, Anna became an excellent swimmer. Over time, the first signs of Anna's deteriorating mental health appeared. Shortly before the end of primary school, she sought support from one of her teachers for the first time. At this point, she admitted that she had suicidal thoughts. Anna's foster parents were very worried about this fact. They feared that the situation could worsen in high school. For this reason, Geraldine and Patrick decided to meet with the school's administration to which Anna was to transfer. They wanted the faculty to be aware of the situation, and to some extent that helped. When the girl was in the classroom, she could feel safe. But outside the classroom, the bullying continued. Many of those who picked on Anna started before the school year even began. The most cruel things happened during the summer holidays. Boys who were a few years older than her sent her inappropriate messages. The girl was also specifically harassed on her social media accounts. Most often, Anna faced harassment. This was mainly due to her unusual appearance. At 13 years old, she was 1.73 meters tall. According to Geraldine, her daughter could pass for an 18-year-old girl. Her body was developing at a rapid pace. The rebellious teenagers sometimes crossed the line between emotional and physical abuse. One such incident occurred on Halloween night. When she left a teen disco, several boys her age followed her. They began to chase her. One of them repeatedly asked her to go into a bush while repeatedly grabbing her hands. The next day, the girl's parents reported the incident to the police. In the end, the boy only received a warning. It is worth noting that not only Anna's appearance was a reason for mockery. Classmates also pointed out that she was an adopted daughter and claimed that her parents were not real. On several occasions, Geraldine and Patrick showed the school administration the insulting messages their daughter had received. It is hard to say how the school administration reacted, but the situation was never resolved. Anna was a sensitive girl. Of course, she could appear happy in everyday life, but inside, there was always a storm raging. According to Patrick, his daughter was often disappointed in other people. She tried to find common ground with other children, but she was constantly rejected, which affected her self-esteem. Anna said she was afraid to talk about her feelings. She feared that this would become another subject of ridicule. Basically, the girl was a completely normal teenager who just wanted to enjoy her youth. But instead, she had to be afraid of her peers. Fear overcame the girl, and her behavior began to change. Anna's parents noticed that she was becoming more and more anxious. In high school, the girl was involved in several fights. Several times, she was suspended from school. It went so far that Anna put makeup around her eyes to imitate bruises. She also began posting on her social media accounts, and from other accounts, these messages were even creepier than those she had received from her classmates. It didn't take long for Geraldine to find out. The woman demanded that her daughter give her access to all accounts. She also demanded that she give her the code to unlock her mobile phone. Since then, Anna regularly gave her phone to her parents for inspection. And during one of these checks, Geraldine discovered a strange photo of her daughter. It showed Anna sitting tied to a chair with her eyes closed. According to the teenager, it was a joke photo. However, the girl's emotional instability increased, and her self-esteem was severely damaged. Anna even went so far as to harm herself with scissors. At this crisis point, the parents decided it was time to seek help. They first turned to the local branch of a volunteer organization dedicated to supporting young people in difficult situations. However, the organization staff declined a request from Anna's parents after learning of the incident and referred the girl to their colleagues who specialized in helping people who had harmed themselves. After Anna had undergone 6 therapy sessions, her parents, Geraldine and Patrick, reapplied on behalf of their daughter to the first organization. She was eventually accepted. By participating in these facilities, Anna gained stability. She was also able to form friendships with other teenagers who were experiencing similar feelings and situations. It seemed that Anna's mental health was finally improving, but the peace of mind of her parents was short-lived. They were drawn into the worst nightmare they could experience. In May 2018, the life of 14-year-old Anna in the family house in a suburb of Dublin was relatively normal. It was true that she had not been successful in her studies. She was not a dumb child, but learning English was a challenge. According to Geraldine, this had set her daughter back significantly in education. Adding to the difficulty was that her hearing was impaired due to the operation. The most difficult subjects for Anna were those in which she had to memorize many different terms and concepts. For this reason, Geraldine offered on May 13, 2018, the day before her daughter's exams, to help her study. It was morning when mother and daughter were just about to sit down to the learning material. 15 minutes later, Anna remembered that she and her parents had a family meeting that day. They decided that she and Geraldine would pass the time by watching movies. In return, Patrick ordered pizza and made popcorn. While the girls' parents and their guests drank and chatted in the living room, Anna and one of her cousins locked themselves in a room and began dancing and recording videos, which was their favorite activity. The gathering ended early. When the guests left, Anna went to her parents' room to say goodnight and asked her mother to wake her up early the next morning so she had time to say goodbye before she went to work. Early in the morning of May 14th, the girl asked Geraldine to write a certificate for her, which Anna needed to leave school early and go to her therapy session. The morning went as usual in the family's house. Geraldine went to work, Anna to school, and Patrick stayed home and did his usual tasks. Around 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. Patrick opened the door and saw a boy about Anna's age. The teenager, who will be referred to as Boy B because his identity was kept secret, came from a wealthy family and had previously performed well in school, exceeding that of his peers. However, when he entered puberty, his interest in learning began to wane. Although he could work with his hands, he was more interested in modern technology. At the same time, he had no interest in social media. He was indifferent to mobile phones. According to people close to the boy, he had few friends. He did not engage in physical activities, but was usually found in the company of small children. Instead of going for walks outside, he preferred to stay at home and watch anime. Anna knew Boy B. She went to school with him. When she came to the door, the girl told her father that she didn't know why the boy had come to see her. Nevertheless, she greeted him. Then the teenagers went outside. They wanted to talk, so Patrick couldn't hear them. After a few minutes, Anna returned to the house and went to her room. She put on a black sweatshirt with white lettering on the sleeves that she had received from her mother and faux leather pants. Then the girl went back downstairs and assured her father with a broad smile on her face that she would be back soon. For some reason, Patrick did not ask his daughter where she was going, but when he looked at the neighboring street, he saw that the teenagers were heading towards St. Catherine's Park. On the same day, Geraldine returned from Dublin earlier than usual. When she got home, she immediately learned the news that shocked her. Patrick had told her about Boy B and that Anna had gone for a walk with him. Geraldine's concern was justified. The girl had been harassed in the past by other teenagers. The woman knew who Boy B was, and this knowledge worried her. She realized that Anna was not messing around with him. After some time, Geraldine sent her daughter a text message, asking her to come home immediately. When she received no answer, she wrote a new message. In it, the woman threatened the girl that if she didn't come home soon, she would call the police. Geraldine's maternal instincts kicked in, and she realized that she was behaving like a paranoid and compulsive mother. But concern for her daughter prompted her to go looking. After searching St. Catherine's Park, she saw no one except people walking their dogs. Finally, she returned home. After dinner, she went out again, this time by car, hoping that her daughter had gone on her usual route. With each passing minute, the woman's agitation grew. Since Boy B did not live near Anna, Geraldine had never met his parents and did not know his address. When she called the parents of other students to find out this information, the woman was again at a loss. None of her acquaintances had the address or phone number of the teenager's parents. In her desperation, Anna's parents turned to their old acquaintance, the retired investigator John Quinn. John advised them to contact the police station immediately. The authorities took the report, but tried to reassure Geraldine and Patrick by saying that not much time had passed. Indeed, police officers in this part of Ireland often received reports of missing teenagers. In most cases, these teenagers reappeared a few hours after their disappearance. Nevertheless, Geraldine insisted that such behavior was unusual for her daughter. The officers did not consider the situation alarming, but they still set out to look for Anna. When the officers arrived at Boy B's house, he confirmed that he had indeed been out with Anna. He said he had last seen her around 6 p.m. in St. Catherine's Park. Early in the morning of May 15, 2018, after receiving no information from their daughter, Geraldine and Patrick began their own search. Their efforts focused on the area of the aforementioned park and its surroundings. They questioned every person they met, but no one reported having seen the girl. Finally, the police officers initiated an official investigation into Anna's disappearance. They traveled again to Boy B's house. This time, it was Sergeant John Dunn who spoke with him. Through his questions, some details of the events came to light. According to the new evidence, Boy B had gone to the girl's house at the request of one of his friends, whom I will refer to as Boy A, who, unlike Anna, was born into a warm and loving family. Although he never showed signs of mental disorder, his parents described him as a strange and peculiar child. He showed an unusual interest in horror films. Moreover, he spent a lot of time on the internet and playing video games. Many of these games were violent and explicit. However, he never hurt the people around him. Boy A released his free energy by practicing martial arts. Another characteristic of his personality was his interest in the structure of the human body. Boy B said that Anna was in love with his friend Boy A, but the feeling was not mutual. Boy A had asked his friend to bring Anna to the park so they could talk. The sergeant then took the teenager to the park to show him on-site the route he had taken in Anna's company. The main interest was the place where he had last seen her. After marking this information on a map, the policeman let the teenager go home. The authorities then issued a public statement naming Anna's physical characteristics. Soon, possible clues about the girl's whereabouts began to come into the police, each of which was examined. Some turned out to be close to the truth, while others led the investigators into dead ends. As Sergeant Dunn was examining the railway tracks near the park, he met a man who was walking in the area with his son. He reported that he had seen news reports about Anna's disappearance. He also said that there were several abandoned buildings behind the water treatment plant where teenagers of the missing girl's age usually hung out. The authorities decided that these two minor boys were the key witnesses in this case. They eventually set out to look for Boy and to ask him questions. When Sergeant Dunn arrived at the teenager's home, he found that Boy A and his father were the same people he had previously spoken to near the railway tracks. A few hours later, the police took both boys to a park to retrace the path they had taken on the day of Anna's disappearance. The path they took ended near a railing. At this point, the teenagers exchanged glances that Sergeant Dunn later described as collusion. This led the sergeant to believe that the youths, who had not yet been charged with any crime, had something important to hide. At that moment, new details emerged in Boy B's version that were not included in his original story. The police then brought the youths and their parents to the station. Boy B continued to claim that after he had left Anna in the company of his friend, he had never heard from her again. He had no idea that something bad might have happened to her. Boy A, in turn, described in great detail what he had done that day. He explained that Boy B was one of his closest friends and that they had arranged to meet in the park that afternoon. He said he did not know that his friend would bring Anna, who had harassed him. He realized that the girl was in love with him. She had once asked him out on a date. He had declined at that time. The same happened this time as well. Allegedly, after these words, Anna turned around and left without saying a word. The police officers noticed that Boy A had injuries on his hands and face. They questioned him about this, and he explained that after Anna had left him alone, He went for a walk. During the walk, he was attacked by two men who threw him to the ground and kicked him several times. The story seemed to make sense, but the teenager had new details. He stated that he had managed to get up and kick one of the attackers in the head. This part of the story matched his fantasy. To confirm or refute this report, the officers questioned the youth further. Boy A's description of the alleged attackers allowed the authorities to create a composite sketch of them. Based on the image of the attackers, the investigators again questioned people who were in the park on the day of the disappearance. None of the respondents recognized the attackers. Finally, the police took a sample of the mud from the teenager's boots and took his mobile phone. On Wednesday, May 16, 2018, Inspector Mark O'Neill led the investigation. The assumption that Anna had simply disappeared was quickly replaced by the hypothesis of a possible crime. A large number of officers were involved in the search operation. They were tasked with thoroughly combing the park's grounds, as well as all possible secluded areas, ditches, and bushes. While searching the area, the police came across a dilapidated house known in the neighborhood as Glenwood House. It was built in the 19th century and had been uninhabited since the end of the 20th century. The residents considered the house a ruin. Due to its seclusion and neglect, this building was a place where teenagers hid from the eyes of adults. Both the interior of the house and the surrounding area were littered with garbage. When the police officers entered the house, they split up, with some inspecting the main room while others explored the rooms. At the end of one of the main corridors was a room whose windows were boarded up but still let in light. Eventually, one of the officers managed to recognize a human figure. It was a lifeless female body whose face was covered with hair. After a few moments, it became clear that it was Anna. Around her neck was a piece of duct tape, under which her fingers peeked out. Apparently, she had tried to tear it off to avoid suffocation. The girl was naked. The only garment on her body was black stockings. After a brief search of the room, the police found the rest of her clothing, the bra and t-shirt of the victim, torn to shreds. On the floor were fragments of Anna's mobile phone case, a stick, and a brick with blood stains were found next to the victim's body. All this indicated that terrible things had happened here. The investigation finally focused on the kidnapping and murder theory. Under the direction of Inspector O'Neill, experts and forensic scientists began to collect and analyze the evidence found at the crime scene. Anna's body was taken to the center for autopsy. The number of injuries on the girl's body shocked the pathologist. He needed over 40 minutes to list all the injured body parts. The most severe injuries were to the head and neck. It was also found that Anna had been forced into intimacy. However, it is not known whether this occurred before or after her death. In addition to the victim's blood samples, investigators found several fingerprints and traces of genetic material on her clothing. This made it possible to create a possible chronology of events. It is believed that Anna was attacked as soon as she was in the room. When she collapsed to the floor, her attacker struck her at least 4 times with a brick. Despite the severe injuries, the victim was still conscious and tried to escape. She held on to her attacker with her fingernails. Since the nails were false, some of them broke off and fell to the floor. Anna was then dragged to the window. There she was forced into intimacy. Probably, the girl was already dead at this point. Although there was no evidence at the crime scene pointing to boys A and B, they were again summoned by the police for questioning. However, they decided first to wait for the results of the analysis of the mud samples from boy A's boots. The result of the investigation finally showed that Anna's blood was found on the teenager's boots. The contents of the teenager's mobile phone were also examined. Various photos of a disturbing nature, a selection of horror films, as well as notes listing possibilities of physical violence were found. The most disturbing piece of evidence was the search history in boy A's browser. It turned out that he had searched for information about abandoned places in the city. On May 23, 2018, a week after Anna's lifeless body was found in the ruins of an abandoned house, the police obtained an arrest warrant for the teenagers. The parents of the boys were informed when they should prepare for the handover to the authorities. The entire process was confidential. The police officers appeared at the teenagers' homes in casual clothing. They also used unmarked vehicles so as not to attract the attention of others. The first person to be questioned was Boy A. The teenager was accompanied by his father and a lawyer. His statement was the same as before. Initially, the interrogators showed the teenager the footage from the video surveillance. They showed two figures. The footage was dark and grainy. Boy A was explicitly told that these could be the men who had attacked him in the park. In fact, the police recognized that the persons in the recordings were Anna and Boy A. The teenager was then shown evidence pointing to his involvement. The 13-year-old suspect answered all questions evasively. At one point, on the advice of his lawyer, he refused to say anything at all. Without his confession, the investigators could not formally charge him. According to local laws, any statement by a suspect must be accepted, even if it is untrue. Another interrogation of Boy B proceeded in the same way. His statement was the same as on the night of Anna's disappearance. Over 700 hours of footage from various surveillance cameras showed, however, that the route he had supposedly taken in the park did not correspond to the truth. On the morning of May 26, 2018, Boy B changed his statement. In the new statement, he said that he had led Anna via the bike path and not, as originally stated, through the park. He also said that Boy A had followed Anna into an abandoned house. As the teenager left the property, he allegedly heard a scream. According to his statement, the scream was not loud. Boy B assumed that Anna had been attacked by someone. When he left the house, he thought that everything would be okay since his friend would protect Anna. He stated that he had lied during the first interrogation because he couldn't remember the route. After he supposedly remembered, he didn't change his statement because he was afraid of appearing suspicious in the eyes of the police. When the teenager was shown the duct tape found at the crime scene, he recognized it immediately. Boy B stated that he had given it to his friend a few days before the incident. After this confession, the teenager began to talk and made more and more new statements. In the new version of events, he said that after he had left Anna in the company of his friend, he decided to explore the ruins of the house. When he heard the girl's screams, Boy B supposedly returned to the room and saw Boy A attacking Anna with a judo move. According to his statement, the attacker tried to strangle Anna while simultaneously tearing off her clothes. The girl was crying and begged Boy A not to do this. However, he had no intention of stopping. On the evening of May 26th, the authorities formally charged Boy A with murder. Anna's funeral took place on Thursday, May 31st, 2018. The parents of the victim only asked the public for a donation to a Russian-Irish organization that deals with the adoption of children. Thanks to it, they were able to bring Anna into their family. The girl's coffin was adorned with a Russian flag and a small matryoshka doll. These attributes pointed to her origin. In addition, a small figure of the Eiffel Tower was placed on the coffin, as the vacation in Paris was the girl's favorite activity. After the funeral, the investigations into her death continued. Due to the charges against Boy A, the police received permission to search the teenager's apartment and room. Various pieces of evidence were found that reinforced the existing suspicion against the accused. The authorities found a bag containing what was later referred to as a kill kit. This included a self-made skull mask made of leather, knee and elbow pads, gloves, and a kind of net scarf. The forensic examination revealed that Anna's blood was found on each of these items. Another find was 2 mobile phones. Together, they contained over 12,000 images of adults. Most of the images showed men strangling naked women with their eyes closed. In examining the browser history of these devices, investigators found that the teenager regularly visited so-called adult websites. Typically, Boy A was attracted to videos featuring Russian girls, some of whom bore the name Anna. Over time, the evidence against the teenager accumulated. First, a man walking his dog in the park claimed to have seen the accused near the abandoned house on the day Anna disappeared. Then came the testimony of a classmate of the boy. According to him, The accused had behaved strangely several days after Anna's disappearance. Furthermore, the investigators received the results of the analysis of the genetic material found on the victim's clothing. The comparison with the accused DNA sample showed a match of the materials. This allowed the charges against the 13-year-old to be expanded. He was now also charged with aggravated assault and abuse. Since then, the youths were questioned at least 3 more times. The investigators tried to obtain more information about the day of the crime. Boy B made a new statement. He explained that he and Boy A had once been close friends, but had recently quarreled and eventually drifted apart. He no longer trusted him. Boy A had always seemed strange to him. He was afraid of him, even if he didn't understand what this fear was based on. According to the existing evidence, there was a conversation between the students a month before the attack on Anna. At that time, Boy A asked his friend if he wanted to end another person's life. Boy B did not take these words seriously, but still asked his friend who it was about. He supposedly replied that he wanted to kill Anna. Even after this statement, Boy B did not believe that his friend could really do this. It was not clear to the teenager that this was exactly what he wanted when he asked him to bring the 14-year-old girl to the abandoned house. Even when he saw Boy A committing the brutal crime, Boy B could not believe what was happening. The fear he felt at that moment paralyzed him, according to his own statement. Although he wanted to help Anna, he could not move and just watched. Although, according to the teenager's statements, he was not directly involved in the crime, he was nevertheless arrested. To obtain permission to stay at home until the trial, the parents of the accused had to file an application with the Supreme Court. On August 2, 2018, both boys were released on bail. This decision was favored by the age of the accused. They were each 13 years old. Due to the abundance of forensic and visual evidence, the court proceedings did not proceed as usual. In particular, changes were made to prevent ordinary citizens from attending the trial. In addition, separate rooms were set up for the families of the accused, where they could rest and speak privately with their lawyers. After each hour of the trial, there was a 15-minute break to reduce the fatigue of the youths. The judges were instructed not to wear the wigs and robes they usually wore during the sessions. The authorities believed that such an image of the judges could intimidate the juvenile offenders. The changes also affected the composition of the jury. A new panel of 8 men and 4 women was created for the trial. They were all informed about the ban on revealing the identity of the accused. The defenders of Boy A requested from the judges 2 separate trials. In their view, Boy B's statement could be taken out of context and used against their client. Judge Paul McDermott, who was to lead the trial, rejected this request. However, he believed that separating the cases would prevent the jury from forming a complete picture of the events. The lawyers and representatives of Boy B requested that their client be questioned by experts specializing in childhood trauma. In early 2019, a psychologist diagnosed the teenager with post-traumatic stress disorder, also known by the acronym PTSD. The presence of such a disorder explained why Boy B did not tell the truth in his first statement. According to experts, his lies were not due to feelings of guilt, but to the severe trauma he had experienced as a witness to the crime. Although the teenager's lawyers had originally intended to use the report as evidence for his defense, it could actually have harmed him. One of the psychologists admitted that the affected person had disclosed information that he had not previously shared with the police. It was not ruled out that the disclosure of these data during the trial would enable Boy A's lawyer to use them in defense of his client. Normally, the preparation of a trial takes between 18 and 24 months. But as I have already mentioned, the trial in this case was greatly expedited. The first hearing took place in April 2019. Geraldine, Patrick, and the parents of the teenagers were present in the courtroom and stood next to their children. During the trial, the representatives of the accused became increasingly restless. The turning point for Boy B's mother came during a phase in which her son was speaking. In particular, he made remarks about the way Anna was dressed and claimed that she looked provocative. The pain they felt could be read on the faces of Anna's parents and the parents of the accused as they listened to the reconstruction of the events. The amount of detail Boy B revealed during his statement shocked everyone in the courtroom. Witnesses were called to testify every day. During the entire trial, all the above-mentioned evidence for the involvement of the accused was presented. In addition, several digital maps created from satellite images were added, showing the area of St. Catherine's Park, where Anna was last seen. A team of technical experts from the National Forensic Science Bureau created a 3D model of the interior and exterior of Glenwood House. This model marked the spot where Anna's body was found. The jury was presented with real images of the crime scene, showing both the victim herself and the murder weapon. The defense of Boy B considered it appropriate to invite a psychologist who, along with his colleagues, should provide an independent assessment of the teenager's mental health. The expert explained that the boy had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, which was due to what he had seen on the day of the crime. Furthermore, Boy B's lawyer showed the school questionnaire of his client, which had been filled out some time before the attack on Anna. In this questionnaire, he characterized Boy A and mentioned that he liked horror films and liked to spend time in abandoned places. Boy B also described his former friend as a strange person who repeatedly mentioned various forms of aggression and Satanism. The judge ultimately decided that this information could not be used as evidence by either side. The jury soon convened to deliberate on their decision. On July 15, 2019, the court held its last session before the verdict was announced. Judge Paul McDermott thanked the jury for their work throughout the trial. In the end, Boy A was found guilty of murder and serious abuse. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Boy B was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. When they learned of the verdict, the parents of the teenagers embraced their children. The father of Boy B could not control his emotions, exploded with rage, and was even temporarily removed from the courtroom. Later, however, he was allowed to return. Geraldine and Patrick, on the other hand, wept quietly. After the end of the trial, they spoke publicly about how they had experienced the loss of their daughter. They said they had felt immeasurable pain, and no punishment for the guilty could compensate them for the loss of Anna. The credible reasons why two boys so brutally massacred Anna remain unknown. Some put forward the theory that the girl became a victim simply because she was different. This heinous crime not only ended Anna's life and left her parents devastated, it also destroyed the lives of the convicted and their families. In a case that shocked the whole country, the teenagers became the youngest people ever convicted of murder in Ireland. Despite the brutality of their act, the country's laws do not allow their identities to be disclosed. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourself.